the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
Like Gunner, and I think there are some that still like Nico, and there's going to be detractors on both sides. I think on both camps, I think it's going to be a little bit divided. The offensive line was not producing the way both thought it should have produced this past year, and that was an underrated part of where their problems were. You talk about predictability. I think that was kind of something you saw in the Ohio State game and in big matchups. Like Heupel, the biggest thing he has to do this offseason, I think, is just get more versatile and get that unpredictability and add more of that stuff that we saw in 21 and 22, or find a way to do other things, whether it's boot harder on offense, more motion, pre-snap stuff. Like that predictability part of it, now that you've been in the league for 4 years, they've got a lot of tape of the Heupel offense now.
Right.
That I think it's a humongous offseason for him going into year 5. And then the receiver stuff, where I think both staffs saw that, like, this can't happen again. I think both staffs saw the pressure, and like you saw an exodus at receiver at Tennessee this offseason with guys, but they went down a level in a lot of cases. I mean, Caleb Webb went to Wake Forest, but he ended up at Maryland now, and Chaz Nimrod's at USF, Lee Cox at Purdue. These are guys that moved around. Like there's a youth movement. They were able to retain Mike Matthews, which is a big win. But Georgia did the same. Like they bring in 5 freshmen, one's a 5-star receiver, and then they don't mess around in the portal, where Tennessee was trying to get in on the Zachariah Branch sweepstakes, but Georgia wins there. Noah Thomas on the outside, like Colby Young could still be back. Like I think both sides saw that, like, the receiver stuff has gotta, like, we can't do that again for another year. We have to get a whole lot more out of our receivers. But I don't know. I just think there's a lot of crossover between both offenses and where both programs are offensively going into 25. Because I think both sides, both fan bases, are just as frustrated with what we saw in 24.
Yeah, they are. I mean, well, I can't speak for Tennessee fans other than, reading Twitter, which sometimes is an actual very accurate cross-section of a fan base, but in other words, it's not. Tennessee Twitter culture, I think, or internet culture in general, is one of the more fascinating around, really. And I don't mean that. I don't mean that in a bad way, honestly. I find, the passion is more than admirable, truthfully. But yeah, I do think for Georgia, when you talk about the receiving thing, like they led the nation in drop passes. And you can talk about some other things that like you can talk about separation issues, which there were. And I think, but again, it's like it is all summed up by saying they led the nation in drop passes. Cause like, well, why did they drop so many passes? Sometimes they were wide open, but there was a lot of times where, guys drop passes because they weren't getting themselves that far into space, and they're hesitant about getting hit. And, I thought there were things that Georgia could have done with its wide receivers that maybe would have helped them and helped the quarterbacks, whether that's Carson Beck or Gunnar Stockton. Dominic Lovett, it's like there were a lot of times where it felt like he was attached to the line of scrimmage, almost like, okay, it's second down, so Dom Lovett is going to run a drag route here. And it's like, well, when he was at Missouri, I saw him catching, lining up at Z and catching 40-yard contested balls to put them in position to kick a game-winning field goal against Auburn one Saturday. Like he was doing those kind of things, and was very good at creating yards after the catch. The further downfield he was getting the ball. So, hindsight's always 20/20, and like I think people around the Georgia team or people, Georgia fans were like, why don't they play some of these young guys? And then they put young guys into the game, and like they'd have a shot play drawn up for them. And it's like, bro, you just got like your second target of the season and you just tried to one-hand that bitch. Like, what are we talking about here? You know what I mean? Like there was a lot of that kind of stuff where you're like, well, that's why they don't play, man.
Yeah.
I do think they have flipped that room. Like, say what you want about James Coley. I know that that's a touchy subject for a lot of Georgia fans because really of his time as an offensive coordinator, but that guy can flip a position room. and he's done it bringing in five freshman receivers. Are all of them going to be studs? Are all of them going to be at Georgia for 3 or 4 years? No, but like CJ Wiley is the type of big physical boundary receiver they've not had in a long time. Talon Taylor is the first 5-star receiver they have signed in, 5-6 years.
Yeah.
So those two things on their own are a lot to be excited about. And then like you do have a guy in there who's a 4-3 guy and can kind of, whether he's a 8 to 10 snap a game gadget player that you just draw up shot plays for, or he's a really like full, well-rounded Lad McConkey style receiver, I don't know, but either way, there's value in having some speed there. So it'll be interesting. There were guys like Anthony Evans and others in that room this year who I think you kind of just like kept waiting on to step up and do something explosive and assert themselves. Even like London Humphreys, who came in from Vanderbilt, made like a big play in that Georgia Tech game to score a touchdown in overtime. And like he would have those flashes. First game of the season against Clemson, he's got a long touchdown catch, but the consistency just never was there. And those guys could never really like earn more than, those sort of rotational style snaps, despite the fact that the guys in front of them were dropping passes and doing all the things we talked about. So it'll be interesting. It'll definitely be different for them this year. I think the question, honestly, is like now you've got those receivers in the room, but you lose the middle three of your offensive line. And, Gunner, I thought, played better in the Sugar Bowl than I ever expected him to, if I'm being 100% honest. I didn't think he played poorly, but he made some throws that were like, wow, throws to me. But, it's a one-game sample set. Like, do they try to upgrade the talent there more? It certainly seems like they're trying to, but like, will they, I guess is the question. And then I think, who's protecting that quarterback in the end, because I do think Georgia sold Branch and Thomas on coming to Athens with the understanding of like, hey, we are going to get a stud quarterback to throw to you, whether that is Gunnar Stockton or somebody else. But like, we are going to make sure that, you're not catching off target balls and, struggling and getting open and being missed. Right. So how that plays out will probably be the biggest plot line of Georgia's offseason.
Interesting. In terms of the Tennessee aspect, because we talked before in our preview with our TPL event, and we haven't reconnected since. And it's one of my favorite just yearly check-ins, because this is something that I think a lot of Tennessee fans are like, this is the final thing Heupel has to get over. It's
nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.